Hello, I'm Nolan, a math specialist with Innovamat, and in this video we're going to go ahead and dive into the teaching guides within the Classroom Manager. So if you access the Classroom Manager for Math Journeys at manager.innovamat.com and log in, you should find a dashboard screen that looks something like this. If you don't have any groups created yet and need help on setting those up, please go back and check out the other video that I've made, Welcome to Math Journeys, Navigating the Classroom Manager. I'm going to go ahead and select one of my groups. I'll use Nolan Group A. And I'm going to go to the Journeys tab, and I think let's go ahead and start under Journey Cluster A, Counting and Numbers in Base 10. And I'm going to go look for Journey A2, and I'm going to move over until I find Session 9. So just a heads up that Session 9 that we'll use in this video to dive into the teaching guides is Counting with the Bead String 2. And students have previously learned a little bit of counting on the bead string in the session before that, and in the session directly before that is our first introduction to the bead string as an early form of the number line. In fact, in session 7, students build the 20 bead string. And then in session 8, students do more practice placing numbers on the 20 bead string. And so where we pick up now in session 9, we can see that it's a 50 bead string, and students are still going to work on understanding and placing numbers on that string. One thing I want to point reference to later is this white box that says session finished. We'll see that inside the teaching guide as well, but we'll come back and mention that a little bit later in the video. All right, let's click on the thumbnail and jump into session 9. When you access the teaching guides, you'll always see a screen with the same layout. Up here in the top left corner, we have the summary and learning objectives, as well as key vocabulary for the session. And up here on the right corner, we can see a list of materials, as well as some resources. Now, one thing I want to point out is the materials that have the Innovamat logo represent materials that are inside the Manipulatives kit. And any materials you see that have this pencil and ruler icon, those would be ordinary classroom materials. Now, maybe you don't have clothespins, so you can use a paper clip or a bobby pin or something else that you might have available to you. I'll also point out that the resource here called Logbook takes you to the log sheet, a PDF copy of the log sheet that students use when they're consolidating it. And I'll talk a little bit more about how I use these resources when I'm doing planning in another part of the video. Something that will be sent to your building are the log sheets in bundles, but there's an additional support page and an extension page that are always available here in PDF format, and they're also on the projectables. Scrolling down a little bit, you'll always see the same lesson format: purple to introduce a warm-up, this yellow color to introduce one or two number talks, and then the wrap-up in blue is where students will work on consolidating their understanding using the log sheets. This particular one has a before starting, and if we expand that menu, we can see that there's a printable that we could use in place of the 50 bead strings that we could create or prepare in advance for students to use as a resource. That same printable, by the way, is also up here under the resources. And I could print a copy of this. And then this was something that in my personal use, I've prepped some of these. I laminated them so they'll hold up, and I use a bobby pin. All right. So I want you to notice that our sessions are always condensed with those same sections of warm-up, number talk, and wrap-up, so that at a glance I can see what the progression of the lesson looks like. And then as I expand those options, I get more into the detail, and you'll see a series of text that's unhighlighted plus text in gray boxes. And so I generally recommend that you read through the sections of the lesson, first just the unhighlighted text, Disassemble three 20 bead strings and use the beads to build a new one. Use the beads to create a string for the whole class, alternating 10 green beads, 10 yellow beads until you have enough to make a 50 bead string. Tell students that this is a new string and discuss how it is similar to and different from the 20 bead string. So you'll see with very simple guidance, there's the warm up. How I decide to navigate that conversation, that's left up for me to choose what makes sense based on how students were doing in the previous sessions, as well as my knowledge of my students. Then I'll go back and reread the things in the gray boxes for a little bit of teacher tips or additional information. So you don't have a 50 bead string yet, but you'll build one now and use it going forward. Keep some 20 bead strings assembled as they may be useful later. And so generally in this particular lesson, I won't build a 50 bead string for every student. I'll build one to use for modeling. And if I want students to have access to work on the 50 bead string, then I would prepare those printables. Meanwhile, we'll keep some 20 bead strings available. No reason to untie the ones that have already been built. And then students can use those as a reference throughout their learning. There are additional tips for multilingual learners, UDL supports, and other things. You can feel free to expand those and look more deeply. Next, diving into the number talk, you'll see a similar format of a little bit of teaching guidance for the various activities, but it's not overly scripted. And so you have the option and the responsibility to decide what will best meet the needs of your students. If you need to do some really slow pacing, then you might start with locating numbers like 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50 on the bead string before moving on to other numbers. But if your students are picking up on it really quickly and had really strong experiences on their previous bead string work, then maybe I don't need to start with 10, 20, 30, 40, but I can jump from 10 to 15 to 19 to 26 and try different numbers. So rather than us telling you what you have to do, we provide the resources and the lesson flow where you get to make the choices that best meet the needs of your students. And then I'll just point out along the way that there are also a set of projectables. And in some cases, the projectables don't actually have a value in terms of the class lesson. Think of them sort of just as a title slide. So introducing the 50 bead string and creating one with the whole class, I wouldn't need to project this, but that's just to help me keep track of how this correlates. For the first number talk, locate numbers on the bead string. Again, this might not be something that I need to project. But when we get to the next activity, you'll see that there are presentable or projectable screens that can be used during the classroom discussion. Work with a section of the bead string. And so in this activity, the students are introduced to the tunnels. And you can enlarge these when you wish to project them with your class. And our friend here says, look, a 50 bead string. We can only see part of it because some beads are hidden under the tunnels. And I would work with my students holding a 50 bead string so that only one green and yellow section can be seen and talk about what we know, what's hidden, and what we can see. So I would use this to generate for myself the way that I think the conversation would go, always elevating questions that students can answer to illustrate their thinking. And as we continue to move through the projectables, we can see how it's advancing the thinking. To know which part we can see, I'll give you a hint. And at this moment, I would have students anticipating, making guesses. What number could be here? Can we know for sure? Are there multiple options? Before revealing the hint that this happens to be the placement of 30. And then we move through and get some skills for students to practice. And if I'm having them use the printables, then this is a great place for me to take my time, introduce these, and let them maneuver them with their partners at their own stations. Once we get through the activities and we're ready to hand out the log sheets for consolidation, I'd like to point out that the log sheets are also part of the projectables. So while you have these in hand for handing out to students, you may also find it helpful at time to time to present these to address common questions or to elucidate student thinking around a certain problem. And then I'll also point out that there is the support page and the extension page that aren't included with the materials that have been sent to your schools. But you could print a PDF copy or two if you found that helpful, or you might find that for a small group, you can pull them together and project the support page to work through a few examples with students that need a little bit of support. And I commonly like to project the extension page near the end of the class period so that all students have access to look at the extension problems, especially if they finish with their log sheets beforehand. One other thing I'll point out is at the top of this session, we find that same box that we saw on the thumbnail. And when I'm ready and I've finished teaching this session and I click this box, it will tell the Students Digital Practice app that they are ready to practice these skills, and various applets will occur within Atlas Math. You can see in some cases, like this one, there are a lot of related applets. And while some of these look the same, the fine detail down below shows that they're slightly different skills. And some of these will pop up the next time that students come into Atlas Math. I also like to notice that at the bottom of the teaching guides, you can also find the collection of related applets, and you can tap on any of those and go explore and see what the students will be working on. All right, that's all for now. We'll be back next time.